opportunity to answer that question. We also believe that he entered into an immunity agreement. You'd think somebody would sing like a songbird if you got immunity from the FBI. What are you afraid of? We wanted to hear from him. That's why we issued a subpoena. There are a number of things that we'd like to ask him, and he should be here. When you are served a subpoena from the United States Congress, it is not optional. That is not an optional activity, and he's not here today.
Chairman.
Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Last night, let's make sure that we have a complete picture here. Last night, the chairman sent another letter to Mr. Pagliano saying that our committee might go into executive session to accept his Fifth Amendment assertion.
No, I did not say that.
Well, what did you say?
I want this committee to be open and transparent. We do things as everything we can possibly do out in the open. That is the American way. That's the way this committee is going to be run.
Mr. Chairman, you?
Sure.
It's my understanding that Mr. Pagliano, his lawyers sent a letter saying that they felt that this was an abusive process and nothing but to embarrass him. And he said that if he wanted to go into executive session to give him immunity, he'd be happy to appear. I just want the committee to have the full breadth of what happened here. He said he'd be happy to appear. And so is there, so I take it that the consultation that you're going to do is going to go into whether or not we're going to give him immunity, whether we're going to have an executive session, and when might we expect that decision?
Well, he made the decision not to be here, and there are consequences for that. Okay, this is, again, the integrity of the House of Representatives. This is not an optional activity. You don't just get to say, hey, well, you know, I decided not to do that. So we'll look at the full range of options. But if anybody's under any illusion that I'm going to let go of this and just let it sail off into the sunset, they are very ill-advised.
Chairman Yo?
Yes.
I'm looking at your letter dated September 12, 2016 to Mark J. McDougall, and you say here in this letter, said, and I quote, the committee requires Mr. Pagliano's appearance because, among other reasons, the possibility that he will waive or choose not to assert the privilege as to some or all questions, the possibility that the committee will agree to hear his testimony in executive session, and the possibility that the committee will immunize his testimony pursuant to 18 U.S.C. Section 6005. That's what I was inquiring about, Chairman. And that's your letter.
To clarify,
yeah.
It requires his presence to have those types of discussions. So when he doesn't show up, that option is off the table. You have to be here to have that discussion.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of parliamentary inquiry. You said that it is not an option for the witness who's refused to testify. He was duly presented and served with a subpoena from this committee. Is that correct?
Yes.
And one of the options would be possible contempt of Congress among the options that we have available. And at what point would that be appropriate to consider the options in a future hearing or a request to the chair?
We will consider all options. I would like to continue on with this hearing, given the three witnesses that are here, and they are here, and rather than unduly delay the rest of this hearing, dealing with Mr. Pagliano, we'll complete this hearing and then look at the options from
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're going to, just one thing, Mr.
Sure.
Are we going to do that after the hearing? What you just said you were going to do?
We're going to consider the options, given that Mr. Pagliano is non-attendance after he was issued a subpoena. We will deal with that after the conclusion.
And one of those things that we might consider is going into executive session, since Mr. Pagliano said he would be happy to come in executive session. Would that be one of the things?
I will entertain all of the potential requests, but I'm telling you, I have no intention of going into executive session when he thumbs his nose at the United States Congress, wastes this committee's time, U.S. Marshals having to serve subpoenas, and for him not to show. That is just not acceptable.
Mr. Chairman, on a point of order.
Yes.
I just want to understand this as well as I can. Did the chairman issue a criminal referral on Mr. Pagliano?
When we heard that the FBI had not looked at anything that Secretary Clinton had testified under oath before Congress, we did give a referral.
Okay.
When we learned more information.
And that's outstanding, right? I mean,
We don't know. We don't know.
Well, you issued it.
We issued it, but we don't know.
Here's my point. Here's my point. You issued a criminal referral for an individual, and then you asked him to come in here and testify before Congress.
Let me clarify.
That would require him to surrender his Fifth Amendment rights if you're referring him and putting him under threat of criminal prosecution and then asking him to come in here. That's not fair. And the immunity doesn't cover him because your referral for criminal prosecution came after the fact and beyond the limited purpose for which he was granted immunity, sir.
There was no criminal referral on Mr. Pagliano. Did we refer the comments and the issues that Mr. Comey, as the director of the FBI, brought up? Absolutely, we did.
Right, which
He said he
the umbrella
required
of that,
he required
Mr. Chairman,
he required us to send that.
but it puts him at risk. What we have done as a committee, and through you, on this referral, is put him under threat of criminal prosecution because of the issue that you're investigating. I understand that. I understand that. But it puts him in jeopardy coming before this committee while that criminal referral is in existence. And I'm just saying, he's an American citizen. I know the Constitution gets in the way of this committee sometimes, lately.
The gentleman will suspend. The gentleman will suspend.
The gentleman will yield.
To clarify, the referral was to look at Secretary Clinton's testimony before Congress. Okay, that was the referral. Mr. Pagliano, his attendance is required here. There was interaction with Mr. Pagliano with another committee, but that's another committee. You have to bring that up with the other committee. I'm concerned about the integrity of this committee. I think we've done the right thing here. His attendance is required here today. He's not here, and we will deal with that afterwards. We do have Mr. Gambetta here.
Mr.
We do have
Chairman.
Mr. Thornton here, and we do have Mr. Cooper here.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from South Carolina.
could I engage with the chair in a colloquy?
Yes.
I thought witness Pagliano was granted immunity.
That's what I've read.
Well, Congress can't prosecute anyone, so the one entity who can has granted him immunity. I'm trying to figure out what his criminal liability is.
If the gentleman would yield.
Well, I was having a colloquy with the chairman.
I understand
but if,
that,
but
but
if you can answer the question, I'll be happy to hear from you.
The FBI granted him limited immunity for the purpose
The
of
FBI didn't grant him immunity. The Department of Justice granted him
That's
immunity.
correct. That's correct. That's correct. For that limited purpose.
How do you know it was limited use immunity? I haven't seen the immunity agreement.
Let me also inject here.
No, I have great respect for Mr. Lynch. I have asked what kind of a...
His attorney, Mr. Pagliano's attorney, says in his letter that he was given limited immunity for that purpose.
Well, that raises another interesting question that I hope the gentleman from Massachusetts will help me figure out, which is when you've reached an agreement with the government, oftentimes it includes cooperation with other entities within that same government. So I wonder whether the Department of Justice in their proffer or immunity agreement with Mr. Pagliano made it clear that he needed to cooperate with another branch of government. We can't prosecute anyone. Only the Department of Justice can, and they've made it, frankly, crystal clear they're not prosecuting anyone in this fact pattern. So where's the criminal liability?
The gentleman has constitutional rights under the Fifth Amendment. Whether they are violated by the FBI or violated here in Congress,
well,
still violated.
But as the gentleman from Massachusetts knows, the Fifth
the witness,
Amendment...
he cannot be required to be a witness against himself.
Right, but the Fifth Amendment doesn't protect you from non-incriminating answers.
Well, we've got a criminal referral here.
Not on him. He can say his name.
Sure it is.
He can say where he worked.
Sure
Every answer
it was
doesn't
issued after
incriminate you.
The gentleman from Massachusetts will suspend. The gentleman from South Carolina, it's his time.
I was just inquiring of the chair. I thought there was an immunity agreement in place between the Department of Justice and this witness. So if he's been immunized and you can't prosecute anyone for anything, where is the criminal liability to him coming and answering questions, which further assumes that every question you ask is going to expose him to criminal liability. There is no Fifth Amendment privilege against answering non-incriminating questions.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
But he can incriminate himself because we've issued, a criminal referral here.
He's got immunity.
Because of he doesn't have immunity. He doesn't have immunity. He doesn't have immunity.
You haven't seen the
I'll
immunity
enter this.
agreement.
Yeah, look at it. If you want to read it yourself, it's from the gentleman's attorney. He says he's got limited
No,
immunity.
I'm going to need a more reliable source than a criminal defense attorney. I want to read the agreement itself. I want to read the agreement between the Department of Justice and this witness, and whether or not that agreement requires this witness to cooperate with other entities of government. That is commonplace. For them to say you can tell us the truth but you can't tell Congress makes no sense. That's all I want.
Okay, the gentleman will suspend. The committee should also be aware that the committee did send a subpoena to Mr. Pagliano to produce this immunity agreement. That was due today at 10 a.m., and he did not produce that as well. So he was under subpoena to not only have his presence here, but so that everybody on this panel can see this immunity agreement, which he supposedly has in his possession. Those documents were also subpoenaed by the committee, and he did not comply with that as well. It's the intention of the chair here. We're going to move on. There's a lot to address with Mr. Pagliano. Like I said, we're not letting go of this, but we need to continue with this hearing. We have Mr. Gambetta, Mr. Thornton, Mr. Cooper here. We do appreciate being here. All witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. So if you will please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. We have not received any written testimony from today's witnesses. Mr. Gambetta, do you intend to make an opening statement?
On advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Mr. Thornton, do you intend to make an opening statement?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment constitutional privilege.
Mr. Cooper, do you intend to make an opening statement?
I have no opening statement.
Okay. Please, if you all can move the microphone a little tighter, a little closer, it's just hard to hear. Mr. Gambetta, we've sent a subpoena to you for your supposed, we had read that there was an immunity agreement. Mr. Gambetta, did you produce your immunity agreement this morning as required under the subpoena?
On advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Mr. Gambetta, a couple of questions. Senator Johnson last year released a portion of an August 19, 2015 internal communication between two Platte River Networks employees. Here's how it read. Quote, wondering how we can sneak an email in now after the fact, asking them, meaning them we read to be the Clinton Executive Services Corporation, when they told us to cut the backups and have them confirm it for our records, starting to think this whole thing is really covering up some shady, and there's an expletive there. I just think if we have it in writing that they told us to cut the backups, then we can go public with our statement saying we've had the backup since day one. Then we were told to trim to 30 days. It would make us look a whole lot better. As I understand it, you were one of the two employees assigned to PRN in the Clinton account. Did you send or receive this email?
On advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Mr. Gambetta, 2 days after that last email, you wrote on August 21st, 2015 to an employee of a third-party backup firm called Datto. This is what it said, quote, we are trying to tighten down every possible security angle on this customer. It occurs to us that anyone at PRN with access to the data partner portal, i.e. everyone here, could potentially access this device via remote web feature. Can we set up either two-factor authentication or move this device to a separate partner account or some other method to allow only who we permit on our end to access this device via the internet? End quote. If I understand the email correctly, every single employee at PRN could have accessed some of the most highly classified national security information that has ever been breached at the State Department. Can you prove that no other individuals accessed this data or even passed it on to someone else?
On advice of counsel, I respectfully refuse to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Well, one last one here. Mr. Gambetta, you're an IT guy who's paid by the Clintons. Generally, IT guys don't erase their clients' emails unless they're told to do so. So who told you to delete the emails?
On advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Mr. Cummings, do you have any questions?
Yeah. Do you all plan to continue to assert your, Ms. Gambetta, Ms. Thornton, do you plan to continue to assert your Fifth Amendment rights? Is that your plan? Is that your plan?
On advice of counsel, I respectfully refuse to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
And you, Ms. Thornton?
On advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment.
I'm not going to have any other questions since it's clear that you're taking the fifth on it. And I can understand why you're doing what you're doing. We've had a case here before where answering a question or two, we then ended up in all kinds of litigation as to whether or not you had waived your Fifth Amendment privileges. And so I have nothing further. And I do know that DC ethics, DC ethics opinion that addresses the abuse of witnesses trying to take their Fifth Amendment privileges. And as a lawyer, I'm not going to be a part of that process.
Mr. Gambetta, given that you have indicated that you do not intend to answer any questions out of respect for your constitutional rights, we will now excuse you from the table. Okay? Mr. Thornton. Yesterday, Chairman Lamar Smith of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee released an August 13th, 2015 letter from Datto to PRN's attorney, which said this, and I quote, "We have been following the news reports concerning various investigations related to Secretary Clinton's emails, including Platte River's provision of IT-related services to her. We have some concerns relative to data security. Platte has not enabled encryption at the local device. Given the sensitive, high-profile nature of the data which is alleged in press reports to potentially reside on the Datto device, it may be the target of a cyber attack from a multitude of highly sophisticated and capable entities or individuals. We believe such an event could place the unencrypted data itself at risk, as well as expose both Datto and Platte River systems to collateral damage. In its current state," and it goes on, "the device and the data that is stored thereon," and it goes on, is more vulnerable to cyber attack than Datto believes is prudent under the circumstances. Mr. Thornton, given the vulnerabilities identified by Datto, are you aware of any hacks of PRN's systems?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment constitutional privilege.
I'd like to just ask you one other question that I can't imagine has any implications on any criminal culpability or anything else to the, just a simple question, yes or no, and if you'll answer this one, we'll cut you loose here. Were you interviewed by the FBI?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer and assert my Fifth Amendment constitutional privilege.
You can't answer the question about whether or not you were interviewed by the FBI?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline.
Mr. Cummings.
And, again, as a member of the bar for 40 years, I'm not going to participate in this. I just think that when we bring witnesses here and we berate them, when we could do it in executive session or whatever, I think it would be unethical for me to do that. So I have nothing.
Given that the witness has indicated he does not intend to answer any questions out of respect for his constitutional rights, we will now excuse Mr. Thornton from the table. We will recess for 2 minutes while the clerk is able to reset the table. Committee stands in recess. Committee will come to order. As we last left it, there are some serious questions based on the emails about here you have some of the most vulnerable secrets in all of the State Department, all of the United States, people who put their lives on the line for this country, and this data evidently is unencrypted without dual authentication, and it begs a lot of questions. Mr. Cooper, you told the FBI evidently that you helped to set up Secretary Clinton's New York and D.C. residences with an iMac, correct?
That is correct.
So did you set them up, or did you set them up with somebody else?
Those were out-of-the-box solutions that were set up prior to her.
Sorry, you got to move it a little closer. It's just we're having a hard
Those were out-of-the-box solutions that were set up prior to her becoming Secretary of State.
And where did you set them up?
They were set up in the offices that she used in each of her homes.
Did that include the SCIF?
At the time they were set up, those rooms were not used as SCIFs.
Did you ever have to service any of those computers or work on any of those computers?
Over periods of time, I did service and work on those computers.
You did or did not?
Did work on those computers.
Including the one in the SCIF?
I don't recall any specific time that I worked on it once they were in the SCIFs.
So, well, how many did you set up at her home?
There was a computer in her office in each of her homes. I've worked on their homes for a period of 15 years. And certainly when they were originally set up, they were set up primarily for the use of staff in her homes. And I would use those computers from time to time to print documents. Once they became SCIFs, I don't recall specifically using those computers.
Or servicing of those?
No.
Did you have a security clearance at that time?
No, I did not have a security clearance.
after you left the White House when did you leave the White House?
2001.
2001. Did you ever have a security clearance at any level after that?
No, I did not have security clearance.
When you had full access to the whole server the entire time that you were working for the Clintons?
Yes, I had access to the server.
And you have no security clearance?
I have no security clearance.
You told the FBI that Uma Abedin recommended in the fall of 2008 that you contact Brian Pagliano to build the new server system. Is that correct?
I spoke with Mr. Pagliano at Ms. Abedin's request in fall 2008. We had an existing server system for President Clinton's staff located in the Clintons' residence. I spoke to Mr. Pagliano as that system had its limitations and we were thinking about expanding it. He had some opportunities using surplus equipment from the Clinton campaign that we could use for President Clinton's office to set up.
Sorry, we got to still move that microphone. Just
Sorry.
straighten it out and put it right up under there. You go. A little closer. What conversations did you have with Uma Abedin about the setting up of the server?
I don't recall any specific conversations with her about the setting up of the server.
What about setting up emails?
At some point, I had a conversation with her about setting up an email for Secretary Clinton on the servers.
What about setting up an email for Uma Abedin on that server?
As well, I had a conversation about setting up an email address for Uma Abedin.
And did you set up an email for Uma Abedin?
Yes.
And did she use that email?
As far as I know, yes.
What other staff used the Clinton email?
The other staff were all staff members of President Clinton's office.
So,
Not on the Clinton email domain. On the
ClintonEmail.com to be specific.
There are no other staff that I recall using that.
Who had an email address at ClintonEmail.com?
The additional person that had an email address there was Chelsea Clinton.
So, did you have one?
No.
So you, Uma Abedin, and Secretary Clinton had email addresses there?
I did not have an email address on Clinton.
Sorry,
email.
okay, sorry. Hillary Clinton, Uma Abedin, and Chelsea Clinton each had addresses at that address.
Correct.
What other computers did you set up in their residence? How many computers did you set up?
The only computers I set in the residence were the 2 iMacs, which you have previously mentioned, and the initial Apple server, which came in with support from Apple to set up that server in their household.
And did you set up anything in Washington, D.C. at a residence there?
As mentioned, that one of the 2 iMacs, which you referred to, was in Washington, D.C.
So the other one was in Chappaqua, New York?
Correct.
Okay, so there's a total of 2 computers, one in Chappaqua. Why did you set up ClintonEmail.com?
Secretary Clinton was transitioning from presidential campaign and her Senate role and had been using primarily a BlackBerry for email correspondence. There were limitations to her ability to use that BlackBerry, as well as a desire to change her email address because a number of people had received her email address over the course of those activities. So we created, with a discussion, I believe with Uma Abedin at the time, what domains might be of interest. We obtained a domain and we added it to the original server used by President Clinton's office for her to use with her BlackBerry at the time. And we set that up in a way where the messages simply came into that server and bounced right to her BlackBerry and were not retained on that Apple server.
Who paid for these computers?
All of them were paid personally by the Clintons.
Personally?
Personally.
And who were you being compensated by?
I was being compensated by the Clintons.
Just personally, or the Clinton Executive Services, Clinton Foundation? What was?
At that time, I was employee of both the Clinton family personally and the Clinton Foundation.
Okay. All right. My time has expired. Now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Cooper, the FBI's investigative summary states that the Apple server you helped install on the home of President and Secretary Clinton in 2008 was originally purchased for the purpose of hosting email services for President Clinton's staff To the best of your knowledge, is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
According to the FBI summary, the decision was made to keep that server in the Clinton residence. The reason was, and I quote, due to concern over ensuring email reliability and a desire to segregate email for President Clinton's various post-presidency endeavors, end of quote. According to the FBI, the decision was made in January 2009 to switch from the Apple server to a new server. The FBI investigative summary states that in 2009, quote, according to Cooper, in or around January 2009, the decision was made to move to another server because the Apple server was antiquated and users were experiencing problems with email delivery on their BlackBerry devices, end of quote. Is that accurate?
I would say that there's not a date certain that there was a decision made to switch from one server to the other. In my conversation with Mr. Pagliano, I was aware that the Apple server which we were using was not fully meeting our needs and was not expandable to meet potential future needs of other staff from President Clinton's office joining the server. It also did not have a robust solution to support BlackBerry usage. It's very hard for me to even remember what the technology around BlackBerry was then and how they functioned. There were more progressive ways to use a BlackBerry. Mr. Pagliano had the expertise to set up a server that had a proper BlackBerry interface with it, and that was something that was desired by President Clinton's team. And so over a period of time, as Brian decommissioned those servers from the campaign, we were able to purchase them from the campaign. He then took time to set them up on his time, either in the campaign offices or his home, I'm not sure the location, and then delivered them to Chappaqua, I believe in around March of 2009, when I physically helped him move them into the space where they were going to reside.
So Secretary Clinton began using that new server for email around March 2009, is that accurate?
Her connection to that server, I believe, was in March 2009.
Now, Republicans have a conspiracy theory that Secretary Clinton used the server in her home for email in order to avoid complying with records laws. Representative DeSantis asked Director Comey directly about that theory. He asked, and I quote, was the reason she set up her own private server, in your judgment, because she wanted to shield communications from Congress and from the public? Now, Ms. Cooper, here's what Director Comey said, and I quote, I can't say that. Our best information is that she set it up as a matter of convenience. It was an already existing system that her husband had, and she decided to have a domain on that system. Now, do you have any evidence to dispute what the FBI Director, Mr. Comey, said?
No, I don't have any evidence to dispute that. I believe that Secretary Clinton had personal email on her BlackBerry and was looking for a new solution to be able to use personal email.
Now, were you ever told that Secretary Clinton used a server in her home to avoid the Federal Records Act?
No, I was never told that.
Were you ever told that Secretary Clinton used a server in her home to avoid the Freedom of Information Act?
No, I was never told that.
Now, Mr. Cooper, I think it would be helpful to walk through exactly what your role was and was not with regard to the production of Secretary Clinton's emails to the State Department and the FBI. Did you cooperate with the FBI investigation to the best of your ability?
Yes, I did.
Did you turn over to the FBI any relevant records that were in your possession?
Yes, I turned over records to the FBI.
In mid to late 2014, Secretary Clinton's attorneys attempted to collect all of Secretary Clinton's work-related files from her tenure at the State Department and turned them over to the State Department. Mr. Cooper, were you involved in that 2014 document production process?
No, I was not.
Now, did the FBI determine that none of Secretary Clinton's work-related emails were intentionally deleted in an effort to conceal them from investigators. Do you have any reason to dispute that finding?
I do not have any reason to dispute that finding.
Thank you very much.
Now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, for 5 minutes.
So, Mr. Cooper, you started, again, the whole setup of the first server, 2007-8, right, and you gave the domain, the Clinton domain email address, set that up. Is that correct? That was at the very beginning as she was leaving campaign, coming into office.
I'm sorry, from my recollection, there was a President Clinton domain set up prior to that point, and the Clinton email domain was set up in January of 2009.
2009, okay. At some point when she left, I guess the private capacity came into the public, I have some information that at least 2 of her old mobile devices were destroyed, and you took part of that. Is that correct?
I believe you're referring to the FBI report that mentions the 2 devices.
Yes.
I can't.
When did you take part in destroying some of her old mobile devices?
Yes, at some point in time, when she was transitioning from one mobile device to the next, we would take the information that was on the old device, back it up, transfer it to the new device.
Had you worked with Mr. Pagliano?
I would interface with Mr. Pagliano on this. This is
Did you ever discuss with him how you could destroy a device? Did he participate in destruction of any devices?
I don't recall any conversations of that type.
Okay. Are you aware of what happened to his emails? You actually were the one servicing the server for most of the period while she was Secretary of State. Is that correct?
I would categorize it differently. Brian Pagliano serviced the server.
You set it up, and he conferred, and you conferred with him.
Mr. Pagliano set it up. He engineered it, and I was the interface between the users. And
would he
Mr.
have had
Pagliano
any
and the server.
emails on those servers, to your knowledge?
No.
He wouldn't? And you have no idea what happened to all of his emails?
I certainly do not.
You also were made aware on 2 occasions to Secret Service, I think January 2011, that someone was trying to hack the system. Is that correct?
I used that word colloquially to describe what was a series of false logins on the server.
And not once, but twice, then you closed down the system briefly to deal with the situation?
Correct.
When were you first contacted by the FBI?
I believe it was August of last summer.
And was that the first time you sat down with them, or
Yes.
was that later? That was your first interview?
Yes.
How many times were you interviewed?
3 times.
And could you give us the approximate dates?
Off the top of
Last
my head.
summer was the first, and then
Yes.
subsequent?
Last summer, subsequently in the fall, and this spring.
Were you ever offered any type of immunity agreement by the Department of Justice?
I was not.
How long have you been represented by your current counsel?
Since the beginning of, since I was first contacted by the FBI.
And again, you've explained that it was the Clintons who paid for your counsel up to that time, and the organization that was set up by the Clintons?
I'm the only person who's paid for my counsel.
You've paid for your own
Yes.
expenses. They've not paid for any.
Correct.
Did you have you had any kind of a joint defense agreement with any other individual involved in the FBI's investigation?
I have no such agreement.
No such agreement. Finally, you step back from the day-to-day activities with the Clintons about the time of the transition. Is that correct? As she left office
Yes.
and Pagliano took over?
Yes.
And you were also responsible for the transfer, helping with the transfer. In fact, you walked her aide, Hanley, over the phone through taking the information that they had in emails and archiving it. Is that correct?
At one point, I assisted Monica Hanley in setting up a laptop computer so that she could create an offline archive of the emails that were on the
And to your knowledge, was everything
I do not know the outcome of that.
You don't know if there were, and do you know finally, was there any deletion or attempts to delete any information that had been stored that was going to be transferred and archived?
I have no knowledge of that.
Thank you.
Now recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The FBI report for the average American put the matter involving Ms. Clinton's emails to rest for the average person. It was the FBI. It was a tough report. And yet, you could take kernels, and that's what's happened here. And I want to ask you, Mr. Colonel, Mr. Cooper, about one of those kernels. One of the most venal of the conspiracy theories to come forward out of that report follows on from some testimony you gave. The report quotes you, and I take it you were under oath before the FBI?
Sorry, I was not under oath.
Well, it says you advised that you sometimes assisted users, including Clinton, I'm now quoting the report, when they obtained a new mobile device by helping them back up the data from the old device before transferring it to the new device and syncing the new device with Clinton, with the Clinton server.
That's correct.
That quote is correct. Then the summary describes two instances, and here's where the conspiracy theories have been acted out both in this House and in the presidential campaign, that you recall two instances where you destroyed old mobile devices with a hammer. And Mr. Trump claimed that who would do that if they didn't have anything to hide, and Representative DeSantis picked up that rhetoric and says it obviously shows intent to hide something. Mr. Cooper, I'd like to directly ask you about the destruction of those BlackBerries. Was your purpose in destroying the old BlackBerry device ever to hide Secretary Clinton's emails from being saved or disclosed from federal records laws?
Congresswoman, no, it was not in any way to destroy or hide any information at all. I couldn't speak to whether there were records on there that needed to be or should be considered federal records. In fact, the opposite would be the case, in that I was going out of my way to preserve all of the information that was on those devices, transfer them to the new devices, and make sure that the server.
Well, that was going to be my question. Before you destroyed them from one BlackBerry to another, did you transition the very same emails from the old BlackBerry to the new one?
It's a combination of the backup.